Urgent emergency meeting at the Kremlin. Putin has called a secret meeting. A shocking leak straight from Moscow. Something unexpected happened at Putin's award ceremony. The cameras didn't catch it. Shocking. Russia's surrender is already on the table. Putin's entire entourage shrieked in unison. This is the end of Russia. The US and Ukraine have launched a joint strike. Welcome to our channel. I'm Renata Aslanova, and today we're talking with political strategist Rostislav Morzagulov. Rostislav, hello.
Hello, with a political strategist who has so much news and important insights in store for you today that my usual file with notes that I prepare for our meeting is about 4 times longer than usual today.
Let's get started because it's very interesting what's happening in the Kremlin right now, because it seems that the panic in Moscow can no longer be hidden. So, the Telegraph wrote that Putin called a secret meeting because of Ukraine's strikes. As a result, it was even decided to move air defense from the front to protect Moscow. One gets the impression that Putin can't protect either Moscow or St. Petersburg, and he started to worry quite a bit about his own life against this backdrop, isn't that right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And you've just, I don't know, telepathically read my main insight because I haven't told anyone about it yet, not even you before the broadcast. It's a really interesting thing. You know, yesterday Putin had what seemed like a routine award ceremony in the Kremlin. You know, the usual, a collective farmer here, a milkmaid there, just the way he likes it. And then there's some Marina Neolova standing there deciding to embarrass herself by holding Putin's hand. Well, the news is actually that it turns out, my little birds whispered to me from over there, that Putin awarded a bunch of his bodyguards, right there, the ones who work with him every single day. He handed out medals, some hero titles, he was rewarding some Chekists, basically those who are specifically in charge of his personal security. There was public news about it, but it was very veiled. It said that the FSO regiment stationed in the Kremlin had been decorated, meaning the entire regiment received an award. But that's the public story. But the secret part says that many individual FSO officers also received awards directly from Putin's hands. Yes, something that Putin hopes will inspire them to tear the shirts off their chests and protect Putin, sparing neither their lives nor any other body parts or organs. So that's the first thing for you, just an appetizer. Moving on. The meeting, you say? The whole of Kremlin life right now is one continuous meeting on how to overcome this whole terrible crisis they've driven themselves into. You'll laugh, of course, but this is actually very serious news. There's an operation being carried out right now under the leadership of Kirienko himself, Putin's right-hand man, the person responsible for all politics in Russia. I've tentatively named this operation Whirlwind Anti-Clown. That's the operation. Whirlwind anti-terror over there in Russia, right? When they announce it, it's clear they're afraid of some terrorists. But here they're afraid of clowns. What do I mean by that? It's actually very funny. And take a look. Google it, dear viewers, right now. If you're not too lazy to Google, go to my channel. I've already picked it all out for you there. And accordingly, the problem is that Putin has been desacralized to such an extent that Russians have started a mass riot. A riot on social media. For now, it consists of all Russians as one, putting under any news about Vladimir Putin. Not a thumbs up, not a thumbs down, not any other symbol, but specifically the clown symbol. And this has already taken on catastrophic proportions for Putin because Vladimir Solovyov was ordered to delete several posts. Can you imagine deleting posts? Well, because you can't edit them from the inside, right? When he writes something about Putin. And thousands, and even tens of thousands in some cases, instantly appear on these Zenix sites and Telegram channels, these little clown faces. That is, Putin says something about how, once again, no, we're advancing, everything's great. Those strikes on Moscow are nonsense. Yes, you know, he spoke out yesterday, we'll discuss that now too. But accordingly, Russians are reacting to it like this. Now, of course, some of you might say to me, well, that's not representative. Well, Kirienko and his company turned out to be, well, some kind of alarmists. And this is just some small cross-section of society. No, my friends, it's not a small cross-section of society. Because, yes, on Solovyov's channel, someone will tell me now, yes, only hardcore Zenix and Vatniks are there. And maybe they're terribly worried that yesterday Putin announced that, well, there will be negotiations with Ukraine after all, right? And what's more, that he's rolling back to the Istanbul agreements. And the Istanbul agreements are not accordingly the spirit of Anchorage, and they're not Putin's speech at the MFA. And I'll explain all this a bit later as well. So for now, I'll just finish up about these clowns. Clowns are appearing en masse, including on these mainstream resources where the broad masses hang out. For example, well, a more mainstream resource than, say, there's this Telegram channel called Newzak. It's hard to imagine. Well, the Russian people are right there. They're completely without ideology there. They just went with the flow. They were always happy with everything. These are exactly those. I'm not interested in politics, right? And suddenly they became so interested in politics that tens of thousands of these clown faces appear there under any post about Vladimir Putin. This shows that it's over, dear friends. Putin is done because this theme has gone to the people. It's no longer an elite topic. It's no longer a topic for people like me, hardcore Russian anti-Putinoids, anti-war people, pro-Ukrainian people. It's not a topic for just some segment of people who, well, are against the war, for example, but keep quiet. This has now become a trend for this very aggressively obedient majority of Russians. This term was coined a long time ago, and it really reflects this kind of deep Russia, mass Russia. And so when a politician gets on these skis, like Putin has with this trend, well, he won't be getting off those skis. But there's still plenty of news today, and this is still just the beginning. So moving on. About Putin, the most unpleasant language is flying around social media now too. Some might think my talk of clowns was, well, oh my God, what is that, right? No, not just clowns. Look at this direct quote from an ordinary Russian woman that I saw today and posted on my channel. She says, "You are a thief and a murderer. For some reason, you started all this for a piece of land we don't need." All of this and so on, while the whole country has been plundered and so forth. And accordingly, there are now hundreds and thousands of such statements across the country. Whereas before, if you remember in Russia, people were jailed for liking a post like that if someone posted it from abroad. Now, no one is touching anyone because the Czechists realize there's simply nowhere to put everyone in such numbers, because now tens of millions of Russians are saying things like that. And secondly, all these thugs also understand that an investigation will start into who jailed whom and for what. And everyone understands perfectly well that being zealous in this sense, now you see there has to be some kind of instigator, right? A Russian told Putin he's a thief and a murderer on their social media. Someone has to notice, write a report, and then the case has to move forward. But now the lead informant, Ilya Remeslo, has switched sides and is also calling Putin a thief and a murderer. And so now the informants realize that this business isn't so profitable anymore, that they'll soon be held accountable, as they say. Moving on. Let's also briefly analyze Putin's statements from yesterday, because there's a lot of interesting stuff there too. There are things that maybe not everyone noticed. And I'll tell you this, Putin is terrified. Actually, right now, within his circle, in those very corridors, his words are being discussed. Of course, the Istanbul agreements, yes, he later and a bit before that talked about how we're still attacking fiercely and we still demand that Ukraine just surrenders and that it's so bad, Nazis, horror. But at the same time, everyone only paid attention to this phrase, the Istanbul agreements, because if you combine this with other events happening there in their corridors, then a very clear picture of the world emerges. Look, Putin has started talking about the Istanbul agreements again, which basically suited the whole civilized world, including Ukraine, as a base to build on and reach some kind of compromise, right? Because there was nothing in there about, hey, let's just give us the whole Donbas quickly, right? It said that the parties might have different views on the territory. Yes, in any case, peace must be achieved first, and then everything can be settled diplomatically. And accordingly, this was noticed by numerous Z patriots, Vatniks patriots, and so on. Look, for example, on the Yosh channel, there is Maxim Kalashnikov, who is also an absolutely pro-Putin person. He writes there directly that, according to his data, all the Putinoids are returning to the idea that they have nowhere to go and they need to, along the existing front line, urgently reach an agreement because the situation is becoming catastrophic. And Putin even confirms this in his open statements from yesterday evening. Because look, there he is standing, right? He took this glass of champagne so everyone could see how calm and confident he is, celebrating there with the military. Yet another, day of the faceted glass. By the way, Putin has started drinking much more now than before. And they even say that while he was missing for a few days after Ukraine started hitting Moscow so hard, it really felt it. They say he went on a bender for 2 or 3 days. Well, whatever. We weren't there to see it ourselves, as they say. But still, of course, that gray face yesterday and the mumbling and slurring instead of some, hard-hitting words. And so there he is with this champagne saying some seemingly jingoistic things, but his voice sounds uncertain. And most importantly, things slip out. He wasn't speaking from a script there. And when Putin speaks off script for us, for the armchair, Political scientists, kitchen analysts and other experts, it's huge food for thought because he said there, for example, yesterday, literally the following: they want to drive us to despair. And that's just a Freudian slip because they are close to despair. They don't know what to do. Now, everywhere on all these Zed Patriot and Vatnik platforms, they are discussing the story that they understand. They talk about it openly. And again, no one is arresting them for it anymore. That they simply have nothing to answer Ukraine with for smashing half of Russia, oil refineries and many other military targets. Yes, there are nuclear weapons, but for that, a tomahawk from Donald Fredovich would immediately fly into Putin's head in the Kremlin, personally. And everyone understands this perfectly. And accordingly, they all understand that, there will be a backroom deal. And they all have a question. Then what was all this for? And so they discuss, for example, yes, I'll give examples here again. So there's this Jivov channel, for example. Yeah, also some absolute Vatnik crap. And they say there, wait, so we've been told all this time that we haven't even really started yet. We're not starting now. We're not starting. And then later. So they never actually started, it turns out. And all these hundreds of thousands of people who died, what was that for then? If you didn't start and didn't plan to start, and now you plan to bail? So it turns out Putin is caught between two fires. On one side, the civilized world. On the other, these monkeys of his with grenades, whom he himself spawned in wild quantities, who have become influential in an informational sense, and in political and in economic, in whatever way. And accordingly, if we continue along this same line, right, then the howling among the Zedniks and Vatniks, well, it, for example, has already reached the channel of Comrade Vladimir Solovyov, my former neighbor at House 24 on Kutuzovsky Avenue in Moscow 25 years ago. And accordingly, right there on his channel sit, two Vatniks. One of them is Razvedos, the other is Fighter Bomber. There's such a guy. Yeah, he appears with his face covered because he's supposedly an active member of the Russian army, mind you. And they say, quite literally, verbatim, word for word, that Putin and also Solovyov, yes, Solovyov, have said this exactly as it was originally stated, are morons, clowns, because they've been saying all this time, right, that we haven't even started yet. Oh, we'll show them. And it all turned out to be a lie. And accordingly, this all leads us to the conclusion that there is indeed despondency in the Putin camp. And in addition to this, of course, a big final point in this somewhat long speech, but quite information rich, is the statement by Comrade Bortnikov, the director of the FSB. Because, yes, someone might look for some, bravado in Putin's words, like, no, we're moving forward, although everyone knows perfectly well what kind of forward they're going, right? It's a negative surfacing. They've lost 600 square kilometers over the last 6 months. And the statement by FSB Director Bortnikov, who is part of Putin's circle of those scoundrels who are precisely the beneficiaries of the war, because his security structure received huge power, and therefore money from Putin during the war. And Bortnikov says that, yes, he's asked the question, well, Zelensky is a terrorist, right? He says he's a terrorist. Of course, he's the one deciding there, and therefore we have no other option but to conduct negotiations with him. What's characteristic is that Bortnikov said this even before Putin stepped onto the stage late yesterday evening and started saying that, yes, we're returning to peace negotiations, here are the Istanbul agreements and so on. Putin is in a bad way everywhere. And fortunately, with his schizophrenic mind, he started to more or less understand it. And this is evidenced by the fact that he hysterically bestows high awards upon his guards so that they prevent a coup when the coup begins, and it will definitely begin. And all the other points that I mentioned to you about this just above also lead absolutely to only one and the same conclusion.
Yes, indeed. Yesterday we heard a whole series of interesting statements, and Putin, as you said, and Lavrov and Ushakov and Bortnikov, all in one voice, well, are literally already begging for peace. And it feels more and more like there's this realization that it's time to end the so-called special military operation, but no one knows how to do it gracefully anymore because they can no longer maintain the propaganda image. And as you said, even the Z bloggers have started to panic. For instance, that same Goldman addressed Putin directly and said, basically, we're being destroyed and we can't even strike back. And overall, we didn't see any harsh escalation in yesterday's statements or any statements regarding the fact that the armed forces of Ukraine have intensified strikes on Crimea and Russian regions. In other words, they're just begging for peace. And it feels like the regime as a whole isn't just shaky anymore. It has literally started to crack.
Yes, that's actually the case. And, well, in principle, it's clear that Ukraine is already winning on all fronts today, even in diplomatic terms. And look at these leaks that are coming out, for example, in the American press. And that's always some kind of political game in America because it's a tool. These insider leaks that trusted politicians give to their trusted journalists are always a tool for manipulation, a tool for influence, because that's how it works there. I was in America 20 years ago and saw this business from the inside. It was very interesting. Lobbying there is official. And so when we read serious sources, once again, like this morning, for example, we read that allegedly Trump told Zelensky that, well, basically, you're doing great, you're pushing through everywhere like a tank, and you need to keep doing it and do it even more actively because otherwise we won't reconcile Putin with reality. I'm convinced that this is true because judging by Comrade Putin's pale face and shaky gait yesterday, when he finally emerged after a long silence on topics that are simply rocking Russia and started saying something, his words were extremely timid. And in general, in principle, even in a military sense, if we consider it, well, look, today everyone is discussing how Ukraine is launching a counteroffensive in Kostiantynivka, right? And today, many military analysts believe that Crimea is absolutely defenseless today against Ukrainian warriors. And if, for example, suddenly, I'm speaking theoretically now, such a decision is made, then Ukraine will truly be able to bring all of Crimea under its control. Well, maybe not in 2 days like Comrade Simonian wanted to capture Kiev, but certainly in some tangible, small number of days, because there's absolutely nothing there today. No weapons, no ammunition supply, and certainly no fuel, as you know. And so that's also a clear story, so to speak. And in short, we are at a moment of a historical crossroads. This doesn't guarantee safety for us here in Kiev. We must also understand this because this cornered rat, which is, by the way, Putin's own allegory, he spoke of such situations, is capable of biting someone, even a larger beast, which is certainly. Today, Ukraine is together with its partners. And accordingly, yes, we should be wary. Yes, there might be some hysterical shots. Yes, obviously, they are stockpiling missiles now because, yes. We can see that there are quite few strikes on Ukrainian cities, on Kiev in recent days. And this only means that all the missiles they produce are now somewhere out there, at combat positions being prepared to accordingly fire at us here. But despite all this trend reversal is so obvious today that, returning to the beginning of our conversation, yes, I'll remind you that today it's already noticeable even in Putin's inner circle. And in the broad Russian masses, it has become even more noticeable.
Rostislav, thank you very much for such interesting analytics and for the insights from Moscow. We will continue to follow the development of events there. Well, and we are always glad to see you again.
And it's always mutual goodbye.